Sam, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks, Craig.
Hey, mate, it's good to have a chat. And I'm just going to throw this out there from the start. One of my ex-students, I supported the master's process for you, and we looked at some really interesting questions around first 15 rugby. And given the media attention that first 15 rugby has been getting over the last 7 days or so, with returning to school and some decisions that some boys have been making about potentially repeating year 13, I just thought it was a really interesting topic to jump into and get your thoughts. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, what's been spinning in your head regarding, just the whole idea of first 15 rugby and the motivations behind some of the players from your experiences and some of the conversations that you've had.
Yeah. It's been quite an interesting week or so. Like I'm now based in Melbourne and still get all the notifications from stuff back home. And so it was really interesting to see some of that, and certainly brought, like we finished the Masters a year and a half ago or so, and actually really brought a lot of that all back. And so really got me thinking about all the things from talking to those kids, two or so years ago around, the experience that they have with their rugby and how that all ties into kind of who they are and what it means to them. And so when you suddenly see things like this happening, where obviously there's been, the season's all been shortened, or is it even going to happen and stuff? And so all of that tied into it. Must be a really tough time for those kids to be thinking, hey, this was my year. I'm a year 13 student, now we're the leaders of this team, we're the leaders in our school, and suddenly that's all kind of been thrown all over the place, and no one's really gone through this before, so who's there to support them and help them sort of through that as well? So that certainly has been, it's got my head spinning quite a bit, as I'm sure it has with you. And so there's lots of stuff sort of going around. So it's been and trying to figure out actually, what does it all mean, and how best can the people who are there to support them, how can they help them? I guess that's kind of the things that you'd hope, I know to go through my head, but hope that on the ground there's some of that happening.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk a little bit about the questions that you did ask in your Masters. But before we go there, it's probably important to give some perspective about where you fit in here. And, you've been involved in youth sport for a reasonably long time now, and as a coach and as an administrator and working on the ground. And so just to give a little bit of a background as to why this is important to you, why you enjoy this conversation, and then we can jump into some of the specifics around what you actually investigated in your research.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, when you ask that question, it's always quite funny because, what drives you and how do you get there? It's kind of that, all of the experiences I've had. And so I guess some of the nitty gritty stuff is kind of, I did my undergraduate in Dunedin and then moved into working with AFL New Zealand. So a minority sport in the country, and kind of when you work in a minority sport, you do a bit of everything. So was involved in doing a whole lot of school-based programs. So, I might be coaching a 6-year-old in the morning, a 14, 15-year-old in the afternoon. And then I was involved in sort of our high performance in AFL in New Zealand, and as high performance as you can kind of get there. So coaching some of our adults. And so I kind of moved through that. And then obviously for me, I realized that I was quite into how players and athletes develop, but then you realize that coaching is so important in that because they have such a big impact on that experience. And so then that led to me getting into a bit more coach development, and then realizing that I needed to probably understand a bit more of the sort of academic side of some of the theory behind this, which drives all of our actions. And so from that, I kind of decided I needed to do a bit more of a Masters. I decided I wanted to do my Masters, and luckily got linked up with you, which was pretty cool. So I was able to then put the topic around an area that we thought, and it's funny that you say the media attention in the last 7 days. Well, that was actually for the first 15 1A comp. That's actually what drove the reason I wanted to look at the first 15 comp in the first place. And this is, 3-4 years ago, because there's a whole lot of media attention about it then. So it's actually been in the media quite a bit, and around some of the sort of moral and ethical things that were happening, and whether there needed to be a bit of a change and that increased professionalisation as well. So or the perceived increased professionalisation of the grade. So that's kind of what drove that. And then kind of off the back of that, in the middle of it, I then ended up landing a role with Auckland Rugby, which was quite handy to tie in with what I was looking at. But that was a coach development role. So that was really, I was there for about 2.5 years. And so that really drove a lot of the seeing what's happening on the ground and seeing from a system point of view, but also from an individual point of view, working with coaches and all the pressures and external things that are happening to them, and how the environment maybe drives some of their behaviour as well. And so my role was to try and figure out, well, how can we best help them to provide the best possible experience for their kids. And then it's funny because you kind of realise that, and then you kind of go back. I look back at when I was a player, and you realise that actually the reason I kind of find this stuff important is because of the experiences I had when I was growing up. And it is funny because sport's always been such a wonderful part of my life. It's been so important. I played basketball and cricket all through school. I played tennis and rugby. I played so many things. It, was a major driver in the relationship with me and my dad, which has always been really close because we played sport together. We played Premier Cricket together because he had me when we were 20. So I played, AFL with him, and he still was playing in our club team, and we played Premier Cricket together. So it was, all these things happening. It's been great. But the reason I got into sort of this coach development is because some of the experiences I had, I saw the negative things, and you sort of started to go through your head, actually, there's got to be a better way. This can't be the way that we treat, kids at this age. It seemed, and then as I got through, you sort of, in the administration role, you start to see some of that as well, and the impact it has on these kids who are coming through your programs. So it's quite funny. I look at it and realise, although sport's been really wonderful, the reason I'm in this sort of area and looking at this stuff is because I see some of the negative aspects, and you kind of feel like, hey, we can do better. So how can I influence that? How can I make it a better experience for kids? So maybe some kids don't have to go through some of the experiences I went through, or I saw my mates go through, or some of the kids that I've kind of come through my program that you think, oh, that had to have been a negative experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, Heath Mills from the Cricket Players Association just came out recently, and it made some comments in an article that was printed across New Zealand media about First 15 rugby and the commercialisation of it down through the youth sort of sector.
Yep.
And mainly around some of the negative effects. So we talked about the strain on mental health for these 15, 16, 17-year-old kids, and how in the elite side of the game, they're kind of having to pick up some of the pieces, with the lads that do make it through to the next level, be it rugby, be it cricket.
Yep.
So it's a really interesting, I think, starter for a conversation around some of your work. You made some comments in relation to your opinion. So I'd love to sort of jump into that now and get your thoughts on what some of the boys will be experiencing going back into their rugby environments, whether or not these types of things that, these comments that are being made are actually the reality of it, or whether we're cherry picking cases, which sometimes is the case, whether we're looking at some outliers and making creating a narrative around that. You were in the ground, you were having conversations with players from a research point of view. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it all.
Yeah, and I listened to your talk with Kevin Till from Leeds Beckett University, and they're doing some really cool stuff over there. And one of the things that really resonated with me is he talked about impact. And so with all these things that are happening, and they can have negative or positive impacts. And so I think that's quite an important kind of just as a starter, as a framer anyway. I really like that from Kevin. And so, like you say, there's a lot of the things that get picked up as a lot of the negative things, but there are, I guess I'll just start off with, there are some really positive things that when I'm talking to the students. So just to frame it up, they're all 16 to 18-year-olds who are all first 15 1A players, so in the top comp in Auckland secondary school. And they talked about that there's some really positive things with being a first 15 player. So, it's a bit of a social status. It's a really important part of their who they are in their place in their community. and by in their community, I mean within their school environment, amongst their friends, with the teacher, even, you know, with teacher relationships and all of that. So, you know, it's a big deal. Like they see, especially in Auckland, they see the 1A comp as the greatest schoolboy rugby competition in the world. So it's quite a privilege to be playing, and you know, it's a big thing. It's the pinnacle of any, well, they see it's a pinnacle of schoolboy sport. You know, not just in rugby, but actually in sport as a whole. And they have this really great sense of connection. Like they all, when we talked about them, we sort of interviewed a few of the teams, a few of the players, and they all use the term brotherhood. It's that connection that they have with everyone. So as a motivator for them, then that's a really important part of who they are. And I know a lot of schools, they really try and create that connectedness. You know, there's a lot of things that happen in schools to try and build them into, you know, their student body, and to say this as a school, this is who we are and this is how we represent ourselves. Well, it's the same thing with their sports team, you know, and that sometimes even is elevated, you know, to a higher level because it's a smaller group of people that can really build that sense of team and brotherhood. And what was really interesting with that is that it was more peer-to-peer. So it was more player-to-player as opposed to coach down, because I was really interested in how the coaching affected their experience. But this came really strong, is that they go, yeah, the coaches can impact on that, and they do give them quite a lot of say in their values, team values and things like that, which help build that sense of connection of who they are as a group. But it was actually, that was almost like players, we're going through this together. It can be pretty tough. You know, first 15 rugby, there's a lot of commitment. They got to do a lot of training. It's pretty hard work on top of all this school stuff. And so it was almost like, hey, we go through this together and we can look side by side and we know we're going through it and we're going to help each other out. And so that brotherhood was really strong. And so when you put it in the situation that we're going through at the moment, you know, they're going to be really missing that, because to them, that was really important. And so they don't have that at the moment. And so where are they getting that sense of connectedness? And as a motivator, you know, as a motivation thing for sport, you know, they need that. But also just, and, you know, we talk about in life, a meaningful connection is so important. And, you know, there's a lot of research out there that if you don't have that meaningful connection, then yeah, maybe some of the well-being stuff you're going to lose. You know, a lot of depression is linked into other, you know, a lack of connection or a lack of meaningful connection in different aspects of your life. And so you sort of, I feel really bad for the kids who are going through it at the moment, is that they're going, you know, sport may be quite a big part of their life, a big part of who they are, their identity or their self-concept. And then this has kind of been stripped away, and no one's ever really gone through this before. And in our generation, or, you know, generations in the last few generations. So who's helping to support them through that? Because it's a big unknown, you know. I can't remember the last time a season just got wiped out. You know, it's never happened in my life, my lifetime. So that's sort of, you know, some of the really important stuff at the moment, I think, around that, is really especially that sense of connection.
Yeah, I know, having some conversations with some athletes that are going back into school sport now, and their reflections on the lockdown period was very much that, you know, I miss the boys, or I miss the team. And so you talked about the importance of connection, and a lot of these other things in the eyes of the experiencer, I think, they fall away a little bit when we miss that aspect of what we're doing. And some of the advice that, you know, I've been talking to people about very much is make sure that piece is there when you get back up and running. Really champion the relationships, really champion the opportunity to and create environments where kids can just hang out with their mates, and not necessarily get straight back into the nuts and bolts of performance. But, you know, performance performance is important as well, right? And some of your research showed exactly that. So belonging, brotherhood, connection, all of these things came through in your thesis, that these are very important to the environment. What were some of the other findings that are relevant in this conversation that we're currently having?
Yeah, I think one of the other big ones is, I mean, we in the research we were looking at, you know, the difference between, I guess, what came through, is the difference between the on-field and off-field relationship with their coaches as well. And so off-field, they actually felt like they had a lot of control. So they would come up with the team values, which, you know, again, if we link back to what we were talking about before, it really links with that sense of connection and belonging. They're part there. They have a say in their group and their team rules and their team values. And if someone falls out of line, they have a bit of a say in what happens to them, and that they can bring them back, or all that sort of stuff. And then on field, they often don't have a lot of say. And so you'll have a whole lot of these kids who have been away from it. And as a coach, and I know from working with coaches and stuff, if they're thinking we've got not much time, we've got to really try and get into this stuff. If we're going to start playing and have a shortened season, we've got to get into our nuts and bolts of performance side of things. But actually, these kids want to have a feeling like they actually own part of it. They actually own part of the process. They get to express themselves when they play. They get to play with a bit of freedom. And that, in the research came through that actually they don't feel like they have a whole lot of say in what they do when they're playing. So they can't express themselves. Coaches are telling the trainer what line-out move to do and then what backline move to do off that. And the players kind of go, wow, it's not my fault if this doesn't work, because it's on the coaches, as opposed to the players taking that personal responsibility and going, okay, I'm on field, this is my decisions, I'm gonna make them, and it might fit in the team plan or whatever, but they don't necessarily understand that. So if these kids are coming back and then the coaches are taking that control again, they've just gone through this whole, they're missing the sport, they're missing their mates and stuff, and then they're coming back in and they're not having the opportunity to reintegrate as a group, and then also have a bit of say in what they're doing when they're finally able to play this game that you hope anyway that they love, and they've been playing since they were little. You kind of hope that they get that chance to, I'm on the field again, yeah, let's get into it. I'm going to express myself and the way I play, and I'm going to really enjoy it whilst still trying to compete and have that competitive nature of the sport, because they'll miss that too. But it's just sort of saying, hey, as a coach, how are you facilitating that? Because the coach is going to be the most important person in that group around helping to provide that or facilitate that environment.
Yeah, they're the nurture of that environment, aren't they? And while it's not completely up to them, they definitely have a big role to play in the development of that learning space. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what's changed, if anything. And I want to provide a little bit of an anecdote here, right? So I played, I was in first 11 when I was back at school a while ago now, 20 years, just over 20 years now. And I had an experience where the coach controlled everything. I ended up not playing in the last year because of the coach at the time. We just didn't get along, and the environment that he created was such that I was gone. I was out. I was looking for a little bit of choice, a little bit of autonomy that you were speaking to before, right? So now we're in a space where First 15 Rugby is televised. There's a lot of talk about its commercialization filtering down into the youth sphere. Has it really changed that much? Are the coaches really being driven more so in today's era because of the possibility of status that comes with the win? Or are we just seeing it more because it's on show? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
I don't think that there is I don't think it's black and white, that answer. I guess on top of that, I think maybe we also understand this stuff more. So we have a better understanding of some of the psychological stuff and a bit of the behavioural stuff and the impact that can have on motivation and that, especially in sport, because sport science is still a pretty new, relatively new area in terms of some of the academia side of things anyway. But so we're actually probably a little bit more aware of the impact that these things can have on the experience for players, and we understand more around how actually it's a bit clearer around, we know that the coach has quite a big impact on that, and then also the coach is impacted by a whole lot of things. So I think to start off with, there certainly is there's more awareness around it, because we always say, and anecdotally anyway, in coach development and stuff, is that people will coach the way they were coached. And so if we're seeing a whole lot of people that are coaching quite with sort of an autocratic style, well, if we're saying, well, they were probably coached that way, 20, 30 years ago, well, then how much has actually changed? Has it really changed that much in terms of coaching styles? It's like, well, we're actually probably better at understanding that we need to be more empowering with our coaching. So we're probably having shifted it a little bit, but certainly the pressure and the expectation on some of the players and some of the schools, and the expectation and pressure on the coaches to perform, I would believe that has probably increased a little bit, or at least been magnified. Like it is lifting a little bit. Like I remember back when I was at school, I played basketball, and we were the top basketball side in Wellington. We made nationals. We came second at the national championships in my last year. We were training twice a week. We had like one morning session, so we might have done 3 times a week plus a game. And we were a very good side. And we actually played, and then we sometimes lost that training because we would play twice a week because we would play in the men's competition as well. So they kind of said, oh, it's a rest. So we might have 4 sessions of basketball a week with maybe a 5th. And then in the research that I was doing with these first 15 players, they're doing 6, 7, 8, 9 sessions a week for their rugby. It's all tied in with that. And you hear from some of the kids, and you see some of these schools now with these sort of academy or rugby classes or sports classes. So not only are they doing it outside of school, after school or before school, they're then doing it in school. It's part of it's almost become part of the curriculum. So it has just been magnified in terms of how much they're having to do. And so that has definitely changed. Like I know my mates that play first 15 rugby at school, and I talk to them about it, and I go, how many times do you guys train? And they're like, oh, no, we would do twice a week. They don't even do a captain's run or anything that's become, fashionable now. So it certainly, it's sort of been like, I always think of it like an arms race. It's like one group does more, it's quite successful, so another group does more and is successful, especially at that age. It does seem to be for a while, more was getting better results. Maybe a little bit more coach control can get some better results, but is that to the detriment of the experience for the player? That's the sort of big question. So we're certainly seeing, and the research certainly came through, that these players feel there's a lot of expectation and pressure on them to perform, to the point where a kid, one kid was talking about the fact that he wasn't even worried about getting better. He just didn't want to make mistakes. So I'm not worried about, necessarily doing the right thing or doing the best thing or being the best I can be. I just don't want to make mistakes because I don't want to get yelled at. And I don't want to, and there's, I don't want to let the team down, which is fine, but it doesn't allow them to develop. And you were talking about 16 to 18-year-olds. It's a really key part of the development as players. So that fear of failure comes through quite a lot because of the pressure.
Yeah, so you've had some time to reflect on some of the findings that came out of your Masters. You've talked a bit about it over the last little while as well, as people are starting to come to you in this space, which I think is awesome. So where would you go if someone sat down with you who was working with the first 15 side on one hand, and then potentially on another hand administrating the competition? What are some of the recommendations that you would provide? Because where the rubber hits the road is a very tough place to be.
Yeah.
Right, and that's where we're at. It's easy to scorn in the media. It's easy to say that these are the problems, right? But ultimately, we want solutions. So, love to get your thoughts on that question.
Yeah, and it's certainly not one size fits all. And I think that's one of the key things. It's not, and because we're talking, it's hard. I'm a big, and I know you and I talked about this, but I'm a big believer. I have become quite a big believer in that environment drives a lot of behaviour as well. So we can take coaches and people or players and coaches and stuff. We can take them from one environment to another, and we actually see a different set of behaviours. And I've seen it both ways. We take someone who has been a great and like quite a free environment, allow them to do a lot. You put them in a really highly ultra competitive environment, and suddenly it's like a different person, and vice versa. So it's not one size fits all. But I do believe the biggest thing that seems to have got lost a little bit, and that's one thing I quite liked about that Heath Mills article. He kind of probed it a bit. Was actually just saying, well, what's the purpose of what are we trying to achieve? And it may be different for different schools, and that's why from a competition point of view, it can be quite hard. And because it may be different for different people within a school. But what are we actually trying to achieve? What's our purpose for this team and at this age group? What are we wanting to get? And, we might see a little bit of we sometimes see difference in what people say and then what they actually do, which is really hard. It's sort of like, well, actually, are we trying to develop these players to be the best that they can be, and the best that they can be at 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, when they get a bit older. So that's always a starting point. And then my recommendation to schools would be, you need to talk to your kids, find out what they actually want to achieve, find out how it's impacting them. All the kids that I talked to when I used to finish the focus groups, I'd sort of say to them, hey, thanks very much for letting some random guy come and talk to you and asking you how you feel about all the stuff. It can be a bit weird. And they all said, like every single one of them said, nah, it was great. Can you come back next week? We'll talk to you again, because something will probably happen this weekend and we want to talk to you about it. But there was just a chance. No one had talked to them. No one talked to them like that and asked them, actually, how does this impact? How does the coaching behavior make you feel? So talk to the kids and then build a program around that. Also, just to add to that, is probably, I'm starting to see that when you start to really read into a lot of the learning and the development of people, and I'm talking, psychosocial, cognitive, physical development, I don't know how many of these programs, and I say programs, these first 15 programs and other sport programs, that take that into account. So we see a lot of, there's a lot of research, and I always use the example of sleep. There's a lot of research that says the circadian rhythm of people going through adolescence, that shifts. So they will want to go to sleep later, and there's a generalization. And then we see a lot of these programs, kids getting up at 4:30 in the morning to go to a 6 o'clock gym session. And sleep deprivation has a lot of negative impact on these kids. And the kids themselves talked about that it was really hard. They felt like they were going to fall asleep towards the end of school, and it was quite hard to then have another training. So how many of these programs are, and this is not to say don't have morning trainings, but it's just saying, hey, are you taking that into account in your program? And I just feel like there's a lot of research out there, and there's a lot of evidence now in some of these things, and you can use that to build your program. So it's a little bit more evidence-based, and then talk to the kids and then kind of play around with it as they go and figure out what works and what doesn't. But the kids have got to have a say, because they just often don't, I think.
So what would they say if you sat down with a bunch of those athletes and said, what is it that you're trying to get out of the experience? And I think one of the things to consider too is the biases from a young person's point of view based on their past experiences. Because there's a lot of compliance in the world, right? Particularly in the world of secondary school, in the world of young people, where getting past the point where they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear can be quite difficult. So although, your experiences would suggest that they really enjoy talking about these things when they've given an opportunity to explore and to feel safe. We know psychological safety is really important when it comes to things.
Yeah.
So what would they say? What would, the experiences of First 15 Rugby, what do you want out of it? What is it for? What would the kids say?
And it'll differ. That's the thing. It's different. We ran focus groups, and we might have had 8 to 10 kids in each group, and it was different for all of them. And there are common themes and common threads that you can pull that kind of provide a bit of an overall picture, but it's certainly different for them. And so that's always one thing that's got me, is actually all these kids, they're in it for different reasons. They're all competitive. They all want to do the best for their team. They want to go as well as they can. But for some of them, the fact that they got told they weren't allowed to play other sports was a really negative experience for them, because they enjoyed playing basketball. And then they got told, well, you're not allowed to anymore. And they're like, well, I'm the 25th player in the squad. I'm only playing 5-10 minutes a game. Why can't I play basketball on a Friday night? Because I actually enjoy it, and I get it, and I'm quite good at it. And I'm only 16, 17. For others, it's like, well, no, I'm entirely on rugby, and I'm gonna commit to that. And so that was, and I want to be a professional rugby player, and that's my goal. So I'm gonna drive to that. Yet a lot of these programs had a bit of a blanket rule, so it didn't take into account the individual differences, which is tough when you've got 30 or 40 kids. It is really tough. It's quite a lot of work to create a program that allows for those things whilst trying to keep it fair and, why can this person do this and this person do that? But it's actually saying, well, actually, we're trying to meet the needs of the kids that we have here. So they'll talk about that. They'll talk about, if you talk to them, some of the things that came through quite strong. It's like they'll tell you straight away they don't want to do 2 trainings a day. They don't want to do a morning and a night. That came through really strong. They'd rather do 1 every day than do 2 in one day and then not do 1 the next day, because they said 2 is just too hard with school. It's just a massive commitment for them. They'll say, just talk to us. Can you help explain why we're doing things? Because if we don't know why, then that makes it hard.
Is that a time pressure? Do you think that we're going to do what I think is best for you because we need to get it done, and we need to get it done now?
And the kids, and the funny thing is the kids, it's not to say that they were like, hey, our coaches are great, we get on well with our coaches and stuff. And then when you unpack it a bit, there's some things that they go, maybe that wasn't so great, and it actually impacted me a little bit negatively. But overall, the funny thing is they sort of said, one of the quotes from the kids was talking about that actually, like, it's fine if it's the coach's decision for our game plan or something, but could we at least have a bit of input in it? And if we have a bit of input, and then we can talk about it and discuss it, and then we can decide what's going on. And if we end up going with the coaches, that's cool, but we'll understand why. And I think, if you think from anything from a performance aspect, like if they don't understand the why or believe in it, then when things change and you're in a complex environment and things are moving really fast and you've got to make decisions like that, then you need to be able to do that understanding why, or else you just do them. And then if it's actually not the right time to do something, you can't adapt or you can't adjust based off still trying to achieve your outcome. So I think that it is a time pressure from coaches, and there certainly is. If things aren't going well, some of the kids talked about, if things aren't going so well, it almost like it closed in. The coaches took more control back, which is that is quite common in a lot of environments, because coaches are feeling pressures from above them as well, external pressures on them. So, it's become such it is an environment where the coaches are paid for a lot of the ways. It's almost a stepping stone to professional contracts as a coach now, First 15 rugby, as opposed to necessarily club rugby. So you sort of see that, and you realise these coaches have got a lot of pressures because they're trying to keep a job and keep the success of the school going.
One of the things that's come up a couple of times so far in our conversation, Sam, is this idea of learning. And I'm interested in how much you believe coaches understand about learning. And the reason I ask is, you talked about the ability to be adaptable on the field, and how that comes to pass has a lot to do with what happens during the week in the training environment, the way that the brain actually connects neurons, experiences those experiences, and then in the performance context has the ability to solve different problems based on their past experiences. Yet we also know that the research will show that if you want change quickly, then something like a drill, doing it over and over and over again in a very, what David Epstein would define as a kind performance or learning environment where there's not too much complexity, which is not the First 15 rugby environment, by the way, then the best way to do that is just repetition. Drill, right? So it almost seems like coming from a place of education around learning, saying, well, this can be a performance conversation as well. Not just it's for the well-being of our boys, right? Which can get a little bit, and I struggle saying this, but it gets a little bit kind of fluffy.
A little bit wishy. I know what you mean. It almost seems a little bit wishy-washy, and we'll hold hands, and and that always gets thrown back at. It does get thrown back at you and talk about, oh well, let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya, and that sort of environment. It's like, well, but I totally agree, and that sort of that performance and learning environment becomes so important. And we're still talking about, in the school environment, we're talking about 16 to 18-year-old kids. And so we talk about to our coaches, are you, and I like this quote, are you setting up your practice or your training for learning, or are you setting it up for success? And by success, I don't mean success in the long term to go to the game, but success in the right here, right there. So does the drill look good? Because it's all success and everyone looks happy and everyone's going to high five and we all feel really good. But then there's no transferability to the game situation where it's a complex, fast moving environment. So I guess to the question, I've been doing a lot of, that's kind of where I guess for me personally, that my next step is really, I've been doing a lot of reading on learning and how people learn. And then a lot that, not just in like a sport environment, but just in life in general. And I think there are so many there's a really untapped potential there to really bring a lot of that in to actually what we're doing. So that, on the practical side of things, how we're actually driving these kids, this learning. And so there's so much, with sports probably a little bit behind when it comes down to that sort of level. I think up higher, it seems to have kind of come in a little bit, but certainly down at the school level and club level, and then you get into the community level, that how people learn and what is good skill. So it's not about me being able to do it just closed here, but actually it's that persistent achievement in a variety of performance contexts. That's the way I kind of see it. So whatever happens, can you get the outcome that you need? So I've got to get it from A to B, but there's all this stuff going on. Well, and can I do it in a variety of ways? The more ways that I can do it, that in skill learning, they talk about affordances and things. So the opportunities there, can I do it in lots of different ways? Because if I can do that, you're going to be pretty good. But we're seeing, the kids talk about, because there's so much control, they're kind of being told this is the way you have to do it. And so it does that. And I think my bias when kids talk about expressing themselves, I think is that opportunity to do that. To take them to that kids want to be able to express themselves. They want to be able to try something. And we know from learning, that's actually one of the best ways to learn, is to try it, have a go, And then if you can't do it, well, why not? We can work it out. And then as a coach, it's around unpacking that and going, well, in this situation, was that actually the best option? Probably not. Did you see the best option? So there's so much untapped potential there in terms of bringing a whole lot of that learning theory into what we do with these kids. Because if we start thinking that long-term development, this is such a critical part for them. And if we can remove the pressure and allow them to do that, that's going to only help them. I believe it's only going to help them as they get a bit older, because they'll have gone through all those experiences of a bit of failure and understand, and being able to understand, well, that didn't work, that didn't try these things, and sort of be the best that they can be later.
From all of your experience working with coaches, what helps to drive that sort of change, that skill learning change, that understanding of a really sort of nutritious learning environment? Do you think it needs change? Like, I mean, you're suggesting that we don't understand it well enough. Like, is that a big part of the work that we need to do as education around learning?
Yeah. I think it is. I think it's a big area where we can get a lot of, along with just sort of like a bit more reflection. I think a big thing is getting coaches to understand reflection and working through that, so they plan. It's almost like it's a pretty simple plan, do, review, but how they actually reflect in that self-awareness piece and the impact that things they're having. So being able to talk you just talk to the kids, but you do something and then you go and reflect on it and talk to people and talk to the kids, and how did that impact? Okay, well, that didn't go as well as I hoped it would, so we'll just change that up. So that's kind of the big areas. But certainly I know over here with my new role with the AFL, once kind of everything gets started, a big area for us is around that coach learning. So the coach learning piece, and one thing I've started to realise is that coach education at the moment is, we're going to do a whole lot of stuff in pre-season for you, because that's when we believe you've got the time, and then we're going to pump you with a whole lot of information and then go and do it. And we're just starting to now get some systems built up where there's people whose roles are to actually help develop coaches as they go through it. But the big thing for us is actually, well, how do we help coaches to get better whilst they're doing it? there's a big belief over here in the AFL is that a lot of the learning, 70% of it needs to be on the job type thing. So actually while you're doing it. So then, with my role, the big piece that we're trying to come up with, okay, so when we develop some of our online content for coaches, how do we make sure that they can apply it in their coaching and then reflect on it? So that's the big piece for us, is now going, we need to build to all our education staff, education, I prefer the term development. The development staff is all around, here's a bit of information. How are you going to apply it in your context? Go and apply it, and then reflect on how you applied it and and then go and do it again. And so that's kind of where we want to end up, because I think that's going to have the biggest impact, rather than hold the stuff at the start and then hopefully you go and do it. Because we know that sort of helps those coaches if they can actually do it and see the impact of it. Then to answer your question, that's where they'll actually go, okay, that does work, or that doesn't work, or I need to do that slightly differently. Just like we wanted them to do with players.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a real powerful recommendation, is to have the little birdie on your shoulder saying, how did that go? Or what if we changed this? And you can do that in two ways currently. You can have a mentor there, and in my conversations on this podcast, mentorship is massive, and it comes through in so many of the conversations with not only the athletes that I talk to, but also the researchers and the coaches.
Yeah.
They've all had important mentorship throughout their development journey, and which has just shown them that there are other ways of doing things. There's perspective that's really, really, really important. And often I just don't think you're going to get it unless you invest in bringing someone specifically in to challenge your paradigm.
Yeah.
We're just going to reinforce what we're already doing, aren't we?
Yeah, and certainly as a coaching group, I mean, that's what you hear, especially when you hear of coaching groups that have been quite successful, and they talk about, they brought coaches in who are going to challenge them, and it's not they say it's not yes men. So that it's that ability to challenge. I've just been, I know you've been watching like The Last Dance and stuff, and being really big on that and the same. And I've just, over here now in Australia, I've been watching The Test, which is about the Australian cricket team after they'd gone through all of the issues around Sandpaper Gate and everything, and they were trying to rebuild. And Justin Langer got announced as their coach. And one of the episodes I was watching the other day, he's quite a caring coach, and he understands all those principles and stuff. And then he'd been doing it for about 4 weeks, and then the team was having a shocker. So he gave them a bit of a spray in the sheds after one of their games. We said, this performance is just not good enough. But then you see him go to they then show the coaches meeting after that. So they have all of the coaching staff. So it's all of them there. And the first question he asks is, all right, I need your honest opinion. What was your feeling about what I just said in the changing rooms? So straight away, he's got, 10 birdies on his shoulder to say, he goes, what do you think? Was it right? Was it wrong? What was the impact of it? And so then they're able to unpack that as well, which for me as a coach of our player, you look at that and go, wow, yeah, he felt he had to do something, but then afterwards he's going, okay, was that the right thing? And so that's only going to help him learn.
It's a it's a real awareness of the ego, isn't it? To be able to do that, I think is quite special.
Yeah. And so, I look at it, I'm watching this from my coach development hat on, and I'm going, wow, like that is cool. He's got some pretty powerful people, and he's got, Ricky Ponting, ex-captains of Australia, Adam Gilchrist, they're all in the room, ex-players, and they're happy to challenge him on it as well. And they go, oh, look, we totally understand, and we think that it was probably the right time, so well done. And so they, and they've all probably got their relationships with players, so they can tap on that, find out how that impacts. So it was really cool to watch, and you kind of go, yeah, that's that self-awareness, that it's not just like do something and then that's it. It's like, well, when we do that, what's the impact of it?
Cool. And so, I mean, just to wrap this one up, Sam, in terms of those environments now that are happening out there in New Zealand schools, where kids are back into trainings, and people are starting to think about the first game, which is not too far away. Where should the focus?
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Where should the focus lie for the coaches and also for the athletes? What's important for them to remember? Because often they're just we want to empower the athlete as well, and not necessarily just rely on the environment to provide, the nutrition that they're going to need, right?
Yeah, and I mean the big thing is making sure that there's that enjoyment piece, and I say enjoyment because what you enjoy about something or what you enjoy about the sport can be different, and it can develop over time. I remember that one of the coolest things I've seen on that is the RPA, Rugby Players Association, did a video which had Steve Hansen talk about the fact that you needed to make sure that players were at the All Black level, they were enjoying it, and then you hear a whole lot of the players talking about what they enjoy about rugby. And the cool thing is you kind of hear some of them talk about what it was like when they were a kid, and then what it was like, when they were 5, 6, 7, 8, and then when they were 15, 16, 17, 18, and then as a professional. And so what you enjoy actually changes and develops. And so as a kid, they enjoyed just going out and being with their friends and getting to, play a sport and scoring a try and doing something cool and dad cheering for you. And then when they got a bit older, it was around, the challenge of it. So the competitive edge things, they enjoyed the challenge and trying to push themselves. And then when they were, a bit higher, that was, enjoy around just trying to achieve a goal. So it develops with them. So I would think it's a big thing is making sure you've got that enjoyment for the kids, but finding out what it is that kind of drives them, and then being able to provide that in your trainings and in your sessions. So I think that's kind of a key thing when all these kids have been isolated from their mates for so long. And yeah, there's social media, but it's not the same as, actual physical connection. And so being able to facilitate that connection and then providing an environment that's really enjoyable and allowing them to meet some of the other needs, allowing them to achieve and challenging them and all of that stuff that they actually enjoy, and, seeing them wanting to get better. I think that's kind of one of the important things as we come back.
Yeah, awesome, Sam, mate. Well, just for those that are listening out there, if they've got any questions, how can they get in touch with you? Yell out, say hi.
Yeah. If they just want to get in touch, I'm on LinkedIn as well, but also always happy to get in touch, whether they want to email me or message me anyway. They can get in touch, and I'm happy to provide you with those details, Craig, if you want to check them up.
Yeah, mate, we'll drop those in the show notes. So yeah, it's been awesome. I think it's an important conversation to have, is, when we're experiencing changes like this, is to get the input from a voice that isn't necessarily entrenched in any particular corner. So yeah, it's been really fun having this conversation, Sam. I hope things kick off for you across the ditch pretty soon. I know that you're sitting around twiddling your thumbs a little bit at the minute, so maybe we can have some more of these conversations in the meantime. But thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks very much, Greg. Always great chatting with you.